which ups the sales and ups the numbers. But then going on to say, I can't even express to you how wasteful it is. I find it really frustrating as somebody who really goes out of my way to be sustainable and do the best that I can and try to involve everybody in my team in being sustainable. And then it's some of the biggest artists in the world making fucking 40 different vinyl packages that have a different unique thing just to get you to keep buying more. It's so wasteful, and it's irritating to me that we're still at a point where you care that much about your numbers and you care that much about making money. Right? And Billie's mom adding that artists do this to chart and hit #1. That this is actually a systemic problem, and actually maybe Billboard should add restrictions because you can't just blame artists for playing the charting game. With Billie then adding, I was watching the Hunger Games and it made me think about it because it's like we're all going to do it because it's the only way to play the game. It's just kind of accentuating this already kind of messed up way of this industry working. And so with that, people saw her comments and they immediately thought of Taylor Swift because she's sort of the queen of vinyl lately. In fact, in 2023, 1 out of every 15 vinyls sold was for Taylor Swift, right? And she plays that variant game big time. Like with her upcoming album, The Tortured Poets Department, she already has several different versions of the vinyl, each with a different bonus track or packaging, many of which were also only available for a limited time. There were also many different limited versions, in 1989 Taylor's version, including one with an extra song, as well as multiple color variations of Midnights. And if you got them all, you can actually make a clock out of the back covers. And I mean, really, the list goes on and on. But that said, she, of course, is not the only person doing this. But because her vinyl sales are so massive, she has been the biggest example. So that's why with this, you had tons of people seeing Billie's comments and calling Taylor out, and then Swifties getting defensive, which then led some people to know that Billie herself has several variants for Happier Than Ever. So it's also worth noting there that at least some of those variants are made from recycled materials, which is actually something Billboard even noted in their article. But then all of this drama got to such a big point, Billie came out to address it, writing on Instagram, okay, so it would be so awesome if people would stop putting words into my mouth. I wasn't singling anyone out. These are industry-wide systemic issues, and when it comes to variants, so many artists release them, including me, which I clearly state in the article. The climate crisis is now, and it's about all of us being part of the problem and trying to do better. Sheesh. But with all that said, whether you're a Billie Eilish stan, you're a Swiftie, you love both of them, you don't care about either, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. And then, when you think of Oklahoma, one of the last things you probably think about is the Chinese mob. Though I shouldn't assume, maybe you do. But if you do, this story is not going to be that surprising to you. Because as it turns out, Oklahoma has actually become the epicenter of America's booming illegal marijuana market. And organized crime groups with ties to the Chinese government are behind it. Or at least, that's what's been revealed by a joint investigation from ProPublica and the Frontier. Now with that said, it's not like organized crime or the illicit drug trade is new to the United States. But what is interesting here is how it's actually being driven in some ways by the increasing but uneven legalization of marijuana across the country. So let's start there. Marijuana is now legal in one form or another in about 40 states. But that also means you can encounter very different rules about how the stuff can be grown, sold, and consumed just by crossing state lines. And the investigation found that this legal variability is part of what's created the conditions for a massive black market to thrive. Which brings us to Oklahoma. See, even in states where weed is legal, laws typically limit how much someone is allowed to actually grow. In Colorado, for example, a marijuana cultivation facility can be licensed in different classes or tiers depending on the number of plants being grown or whether it's for medicinal use or retail. But when Oklahomans voted to legalize medical marijuana back in 2018, they approved a measure that didn't place any limits on the number of dispensaries or growing operations. Like it literally said, there shall be no limits on how much marijuana a licensed grower can grow. And so this, along with cheap land and limited enforcement of other rules, helped turn Oklahoma into a top destination for black market marijuana growers almost overnight. And one man at the forefront of all this goes by the name Chiang Chen, where he came to the US from China around 30 years ago. For a long time, he stayed pretty much off the radar, with his only documented encounters with the law being some tickets for speeding and reckless driving. And whether or not Chen was actually a law-abiding citizen all those years, he definitely wasn't in 2017. Because that's when he and his brother purchased a property in California and converted the barn into an illegal grow house, right, trying to take advantage of the state's recent legalization of marijuana. And as the article explains, they were far from the only ones trying to do something like this, saying the cross-country move was part of a migration of criminal groups into the marijuana industry. Other destinations included Colorado and the Pacific Northwest. And going on to say the players who established clandestine grows included Mexican cartels, Cuban immigrant gangs, and longtime locals. But the Chinese crews were the biggest and best organized. And it's not like this went totally unnoticed. Chen, his brother, and several of their associates were busted in 2018 as part of a joint operation between states and the federal government called Operation Lights Out. But other than that, there apparently haven't been that many big operations targeting the Chinese-run marijuana trade. Now, part of the struggle is just that state and federal agencies lack the people who know Chinese language and culture well enough to investigate the cases. But also, former DEA officials told ProPublica and the Frontier that they've also just become less of a priority. And they say that's actually a mistake because the illegal marijuana industry isn't just about marijuana. It's also a way for criminal organizations to fund their other operations like money laundering and migrant smuggling. It's Ray Donovan, the former chief of operations for the DEA, telling the investigation team, the challenge we're having is a lack of interest by federal prosecutors to charge illicit marijuana cases. And adding, they don't realize all the implications. Marijuana causes so much crime at the local level, gun violence in particular. The same group selling thousands of pounds of marijuana are also laundering millions of dollars of fentanyl money. And that leads us back to Oklahoma. See, after the medical marijuana measure passed there, it basically became the new to California, at least for growing weed. Except it was actually even better, because without any legal limits on quantities, growers could just grow tens of thousands of plants on a cheap bit of farmland, all while disguising it as a legal operation. That's what He Chiang Chen did. And he did this with an associate by the name of Yi Fei Lin. See, after receiving a probation sentence for his 2018 bust, Chen allegedly had Lin purchase a 10-acre property in Kingfisher County for $280,000. And then he paid cash to a local man by the name of Richard Ignacio to pose as the 75% owner of the business and obtain a license, circumventing a state law that marijuana businesses be majority owned by Oklahoma residents. And once again, they were far from the only ones, with a DEA agent from Denver by the name of Ray Padilla estimating that 90% of the illegal marijuana growers that had been in Colorado moved to Oklahoma. With that many new people coming in, Oklahoma quickly became a top producer of black market weed. And at this point, I feel like I need to throw some numbers at you so you kind of understand what I mean. Just try to convey the scale of this thing. We had officials estimating that the value of the state's illegal marijuana market at somewhere between $18 billion and $44 billion a year. That makes it the second biggest industry in the state, only trailing the oil and gas industry. And at its peak, authorities suspected that most of the 10,000 licensed marijuana growers in the state were actually trafficking on the black market. And 80% of the links that they found between illegal growers and foreign crime groups were with groups of Chinese origin. And like the DEA guy said, it is not just about the weed. 2023, for example, authorities uncovered a human trafficking operation linked to a brothel inside a Northwest Oklahoma City home, with Mark Woodward, a spokesperson for the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics, saying the clients coming and going from this brothel were administrators and managers of marijuana farms, specifically linking the rise of marijuana farms to increase prostitution as well as the use of drugs like ketamine. And on top of that, court cases and testimonies reveal things like illegal casinos cropping up and a general rise in robberies and violence. But the crime that made international headlines and in the investigation's words set off a flurry of investigative activity and political attention, that took place on He Chiang Chen's farm in 2022, a few months after a man by the name of Chen Wu moved to Oklahoma and invested in the operation. See, Wu had worked on the farm for a short time before arguing with his associates over money. But in November, he came back, barging into the garage, shooting Chen in the knee, and demanding that the others get the money that he believed that he was owed. And we're talking $300,000 worth. And by the end of the night, 4 people were dead, with Wu speeding toward Florida while on the phone with smugglers to get help fleeing the country. But the police arrested Wu before he could escape, and a judge later sentencing him to life without the possibility of parole. And so with all eyes on Oklahoma, the officials initiated a crackdown. And notably, a crackdown that they say has nearly halved the number of growing operations in the state. But that also wasn't the end of it, with a bipartisan group of state and federal lawmakers sending a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland in February expressing concerns that, quote, Chinese nationals are reportedly operating thousands of illicit marijuana farms across the country, and calling out farms in Oklahoma as well as in Maine and Washington state. And with that, also raising the issue of the Chinese Communist Party's involvement in the industry. Right, and this is one of the key issues that we haven't touched on yet. Basically, it's believed that in exchange for government protection, Chinese gangs provide the CCP with illicit financial services as well as spying on and intimidating Chinese immigrant communities. So on top of these concerns about crime and violence, we have this argument that this is actually a national security issue as well. And, you know, all of this isn't to say that marijuana itself or the legalization of this stuff is inherently a bad thing. I mean, we've seen how much real harm has been caused by the criminalization of pot and the war on drugs. And the goal here isn't to vilify Chinese or other immigrant communities. I mean, in fact, the victims of these gangs are more often than not Chinese immigrants themselves, with the investigation noting they're the ones working under abusive conditions at these farms and being forced into prostitution for the bosses. But the whole thing is certainly a lesson in unintended consequences, as we have this crazy contrast where the legalization of marijuana has in some ways led to this massive expansion of the underground market. And then, for any of you focused on getting your business off the ground, creating a place to share your homemade goods, or even a personal blog, I got a great solution for you. And it comes from, and I want to thank the fantastic sponsor of today's show, Squarespace. You know, I've been partnering with Squarespace for years now, and I have to say, it is just so easy. There's nothing to install, patch, or update ever. And creating a beautiful website with Squarespace's Fluid Engine is so easy. You just drag things where you like, no coding necessary. And if you need a starting point, Squarespace has a bunch of great professional templates. Hell, you can even sell custom merch easily. Squarespace handles all the production and shipping. Plus, with Squarespace, you get access to all their marketing tools and analytics and their award-winning customer care team via email or live chat 24/7. So go check it out, see why others love it, see why you're gonna love it, and start your free trial today over at squarespace.com/Phil. Just make sure you enter in offer code Phil to get 10% off your first purchase. And then we just saw one tiny mistake lead to a virtual genocide in Iowa this month. So as far as this mistake, it was that someone from the agricultural firm New Cooperative, they left a valve open on an above-ground fertilizer storage tank over a weekend, with reportedly 265,000 gallons of liquid nitrogen solution spilling first into a drainage ditch, then into the East Nishnabotna River, and it then flowing and continuing until it finally went into a small part of the Missouri River. Now here's the thing, when liquid nitrogen reacts with relatively warm water, it creates ammonia, which is a gas that's toxic to aquatic life. So with the amount of chemicals that we're talking about here, this river system became a deadly gassy mess, causing what one Missouri official called a near total fish kill for 60 miles, with nearly 800,000 fish reportedly dying and piling up on the banks of the rivers. We're talking about everything from minnows, shiners, dace and chubs, to shovel-nosed sturgeon, blue suckers, catfish, and carp. Though somewhat fortunately, the vast majority were smaller species, so the actual loss of biomass is much lower than the numbers suggest. But still, we're talking about this being Iowa's worst fish kill since runoff from a dairy farm in 2013 killed more than 800,000. And a fisheries biologist telling the New York Times the ecosystem could take decades to fully recover. Though also very much worth noting here, We're talking about this because this was a large one, but small and medium-sized fish kills actually happen pretty frequently in the United States. But for example, officials in the neighboring